everyone. Welcome to Resourceful Humans. I'm your host, Corey Haber, and today I have with me Michael and Gina. Thank you for coming, you guys.
Thank you very much.
Good to be here.
They are both very well experienced in the hiring and onboarding roles as it comes to HR, and I'm really excited to hear their opinions and suggestions they have for people going through, especially that virtual onboarding right now. And also we'll talk a little bit about interviewing techniques as well. So let's get the ball rolling. You guys, I really think that I'd love to hear first about, for those people that are doing the hiring virtual onboarding, it's all virtual right now. How do you feel those processes have changed during the pandemic? I think it's very different from what we saw before.
Well, I can take that. So I'm Mike Kerrigan. I've been in the HR field for probably roughly around 20 plus years. The company I work for now, we've done a lot of hiring in the past 6-7 months. We've probably brought on about 250 new applicants. It's been a challenge to quickly transition from, the orientation to the welcome to doing something more virtual. We essentially have 200 plus employees that have never met face-to-face another colleague yet, other than over in Teams. So, it's unique. It brings its challenges. The idea that we've done, a lot of what our processes were automated in the first place, which obviously helped. Things that couldn't be automated, like fingerprinting and things like that, have become a challenge that we're trying to work through and improve and still kind of manage, where now, they may be doing a little more legwork than we expected by going to the police and getting fingerprinted and submitting it, via mail. So we do have to rely on some other resources that we normally wouldn't do. But it's been a challenge. I think we've adapted relatively well. I think, the company's doing very well considering, what everybody else is going through. So but it's had its challenges. We've looked at other resources. It amazes me in the last 6 months how many new vendors have popped up, and you have unsolicited calls we get from vendors looking to sell us the latest and greatest return to work COVID tracking and return to work, automated processes. I have a feeling a lot of these are going to be gone within a year. It's been interesting. We're definitely being a lot more selective and, managing it through, but the workload has definitely increased tremendously.
I'd add on that. I'm Gina Cleo Bloom. Again, I've got about more than 25 years of recruiting experience in everything from Big Four to ConAgra to .com. Yeah. Well, I would say .coms, but nobody says that anymore. I am dating myself. Okay, I'm out. I said .com was so much easier than tech startup. It's just too many syllables. Anyhow, I've had a slightly different experience because I actually was onboarded yesterday into a new company, and they're having to operate virtually for the first time also. And so what I'm finding is companies are having to be very creative, because so much of the focus right now is on culture. And are people the right culture fit? Diversity adds a whole nother layer to it, making sure that people are being anchored effectively into the organization and into the culture. So what I'm finding from just personal experience is that there's a lot more structure given to the integration of the new employee into their team. Who are they meeting? Who are the people they interface with? Setting up Zoom calls with them, team calls. The introductions are happening at a much more rapid rate than they did before. I think in the past, you'd spend 2 or 3 days or maybe a week in orientation. And then over time, over the next couple of weeks, you'd meet some people here, some people there. You'd have a phone call here, a phone call there, and it would happen kind of organically. Whereas now, that's having to be accelerated because you don't have the luxury of walking down the hall and just bumping into somebody. The challenges of getting computers and logons, getting those shipped out and ready. I think companies have had to rethink their just-in-time supply chain in terms of computer equipment. They're having to stock different equipment. Whereas in the past, I might have just gotten a desktop or a laptop. Now I'm getting an additional monitor. I'm getting a phone. I'm getting headset for voiceover, of the computer. So there's a lot of the technology that is just being taken one step more than anything before. But I think it's still hit and miss. I think companies are struggling with this because they're still not quite sure how long this is going to go on or what's really important. I think most companies have been just doing as much as they can, just the emergency methods. And now that we're into month 5 and going into month 6, they're starting to sit around and say, wait a minute, how do we make this an effective situation? Because we all know that the first 90 days is the most prime time for somebody to say, whoops, I made a mistake, I'm going to leave. They'll go back to their old employer, they'll start looking for another job. So making sure that, again, anchoring into the organization is happening, I think that's nothing new. I know when I was at Health First, we were hiring a couple hundred nurses a year and they were all working remotely. And so we had a real challenge with how do you get them to be part of the organization and feel like they've got a best friend at work and they know who their go-to person is and they create those bonds. So I think that those are some of the challenges that companies are facing right now.
So how did your first day go?
It was great. I mean, I have to admit, people were incredibly helpful. I don't have my laptop. I'll have it tomorrow, so I'm having to work on my Mac and my phone. And of course, they're in a place where every time there's a bolt of thunder, the power lines go. Sorry, I talk with my hands. I know they fly all over the place, so I'll try and sit on them.
No, that's great. Talk with your hands.
Yeah, there you go. But it went really well. I was really pleased. I was wondering what it was going to be like. What I'm finding, though, is we're all talking about how we're so used to Zoom and whether it's Zoom or Skype or anything else. But I think that a lot of people are not using video. They're just doing the audio portion. So you set up a Zoom call, but half the people are just doing the audio. They don't want video.
Well,
and I think that, sorry?
What's the point in doing it if you're just going to use audio?
Exactly. So I think that that's one of the things that companies have to be careful with. They have to explain to people, if you are, much as we joke about nobody's wearing pants and we're all in yoga sweats, I think when you're doing orientation and you're meeting new people, you need to be prepared. In the same way that you would show up for work on orientation day and you would be looking your best to welcome the people in. I think that that's something that we have to make sure that when we're setting up these orientation periods via electronic methods, that people are having a chance to engage with, in a video format as opposed to just the audio with a picture or an icon with their initials. That was probably the only thing that I thought was a little off-putting. And I think that people have just gotten a little lazy. I mean, I know I did a 20-mile bike ride before I went, started work today. So I had to make sure that I was in the shower, hair done and everything else to be on that call so that I looked good when I was being presented. So I think that's one of the things we have to remember is just because it's video doesn't mean you don't have to shower.
Right.
Right. We've kind of driven that. One of the aspects about the onboarding is, our typical onboarding prior to COVID would really be, a lot of handoffs. Recruiting would hand off to HR, then hand off to the manager, and there would be no overlapping, and there'd be one connector at each time. Not saying that all our departments do it, but many of the departments we've kind of helped drive is, it's not just one person. It's 5 people reaching out to that new hire. Whether it's their colleagues, whether it is whether it's someone from IT now calling them and helping get set up. And it's true, a lot of people do resort to doing only voiceover calls versus video. We try to lead by example. Anytime I make a call, I turn on the video straight away to make sure that, hey, if I have mine on, you're going to have yours on.
Right.
That's the thing I saw, the beginning period when everybody started going remote, I've actually experienced the opposite. The first couple of weeks and months, when you get on a video call, you actually are stunned. People are growing beards, but the beards, they're not showered, they're wearing, the
hair's not done. Yeah.
But over the past month or two, I think people are kind of, they're understanding this could be permanent, that I can't be sitting in sweats every day. And that, I've seen a big transition from a lot of staff going from, looking very unkept to actually being kept. And it could be because we're asking them to do more video, but I've seen a lot of difference. I think people, they understand that, this may not be permanent. We may have some flexibility and we may allow remote work post COVID. But it's not, I don't think it's ever going to be 100% remote. That people need to understand that, at any given day, or obviously with notice, that they have to be back in the office, and they have to get up and shower and do their job. So,
what do you find? Oh, go ahead, Gina.
No. You, please. Oh, it was not that important a comment.
I was curious. So for you, Gina, from your, I'm sure it was important. So we'll get back to it at some point. So from your perspective of going through that on virtual onboarding just yesterday, right? And Michael, from actually being the person to do the virtual onboarding, what have you found? Like, what did you find, Gina, that went very smoothly? What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? And Michael, what have you found from your end are, the pros to this virtual onboarding? Or what do you think the employee is finding to be difficult or not liking in that virtual process?
I'll start. I'll tell you something that I found interesting, and I've talked to other people that have started new jobs recently, and they've had the same experience. Because you are not in a formal orientation room with a bunch of other people, you are on a Zoom call with one other person, or maybe 2 or 3 other people. It could be your team, could be a team of business partners you're going to be working with. People have gotten a bit more casual and will be a little bit more authentic in, well, this is what it's really like to work here. And I think that's interesting. I think that's, it's good and bad. Because on the one hand, you want to present the best possible face when you're talking about the company to a new employee. On the other hand, we've all had that experience of, well, yeah, we go through the interview and everything's wonderful. And then you get there and you're like, yeah, nobody's ever going to order your computer. And half the time IT doesn't resolve. So there's a little bit more of that. Now that may be partially because of the role that I've been brought in to do. I'm coming in as a contract recruiter to work on some very difficult jobs for them. And so they're trying to give me a flavor of what some of the challenges have been. And I may be probing for those a little bit more, but I find that people are willing to let down their guard a little bit more, because this does seem more personal than a formal interview, a formal onboarding process. I don't know, Mike, what's been your experience?
Well, so I've only been on a few. I have one person who actually does most of the, onboarding, and she's very, she connects very well with people. So she gets people to, relax a little more. She's very outgoing. The ones I've seen and talked to, I've actually find that, people are more nervous. People are, and I'm in the same way. I don't like looking at myself when I'm talking. It's okay. It's okay if you look at me, because it doesn't matter. If I have to look at myself talking to someone else, it does make you a little nervous. Like, oh, I didn't realize I look like that. And
right.
You're talking to someone else and you're staring back at yourself. Right. So it's I think in some cases it's a little bit nerve wracking, especially, we do a lot of our hiring is young staff, so this is their first exposure. And, for some it may be norm. They all do FaceTime. They all do these face chats, and they're very into videos. And to your point, they probably are a hell of a lot more relaxed than if you were talking to, someone my age or of, a generation that basically this is not the norm.
Mm-hmm.
I have found a lot more nervousness, but they do talk more. They do get relaxed, and that could be either because they are relaxed, or that could be just they're very nervous about it. And, what I've told many times and to people who do interview is that, just let them talk. Just ask them a question. It's not a short question. Just let them talk, because they're bound to do 2 things. They're either going to tell you something great and you're going to love it and focus on it, or they're going to tell you something like, "Ooh, I'm not hiring this person." So it happens that way. So.
Do you? Oh, go ahead.
I'll just, you know me, I'll just chatter away. So
I want to hear what you were going to say. I do. Go ahead.
I think it's interesting, the fact that he's talking about how people are nervous. And I think that that's something that I probably was picking up on today and didn't really process it until just now. But I think people are more uncomfortable now. I was talking to people that were, a range of ages, a range of technical, I was everything from IT people to HR people to supply chain and logistics people. So all different arenas. But I think there is that nervousness because people are self-conscious and they don't have, it's more difficult because, for example, I'm doing this on my phone, not my computer. So I'm trying to read the facial expressions and pick up the cues from a postage size photograph of you. And that's hard when you're used to, the human mind is used to interacting with somebody that's life size in front of them and being able to look at the full picture, the way the body's sitting, the move of the shoulder, any number of nonverbal cues. And I think that when you've got, if it's one-on-one, it's one thing, but when you've got 3, 4, 5 people all in these postage stamp little boxes in a Zoom call or such, it can be difficult because you're not able, you don't know where you're looking. So I think I'm looking at you, but I'm not looking in the camera. So what you're seeing is me looking away, which seems shifty, right?
Right.
And so there's that. There's the fact that I can't see, in many cases, like here, I'm just looking at the 3 of us. I'm pulled back a bit more, but the 2 of you are more forward. So as I said, I'm talking with my hands all the time. If we were in a room, you'd see that and you'd know that about me. And it would be an emphasis that I would be offering, and it might tell you something about me and how I act and my enthusiasm or passion for things. Without
Talk to my hands too, like this.
Okay, there you go. It's I don't understand people who just sit on hands. I have to do that in meetings. I have been told to just, Gina, sit on your hands for a while. Just stop talking, sit on your hands.
I talk to all the time.
Sorry?
I do that all the time. I speak with my hands, and on Zoom, on virtual, it's very difficult for people to see what you're doing. So it just looks very odd.
Yeah, it's because you only see the tips of your fingers. It looks very odd. You got to remember to do, high hands. But I think that that's part of something we have to think about when we're onboarding people is the psychometrics of it, of what are people in typical in-person interactions used to picking up on. How do they identify whether they can trust somebody, whether they like somebody, whether they feel comfortable with that person, when all they're looking at is just this little square of their face and they're not getting the full picture. And so maybe that's something we need to look at as we're going forward and continuing to do these onboarding situations, in that maybe we set it up and we ask people, can you set it up, pull the camera back a little bit. Like make sure that you've got decent lighting. I mean, just give people a little bit of a support system so that they're not looking at just somebody's head, they're looking at a little bit more of the person and then can get a sense of what's going on.
That's interesting you said that. Maybe that is something a company could come back with is, etiquette of actually doing Zoom calls or whatever it is. Because, it's funny, I was on a meeting today and there was about 4 or 5 people on it, and I get off and everybody's starting to leave and saying goodbye, and one person waves, and it just took me back. I'm like, I don't think I've ever actually had someone wave to me on a get off. It was so odd, but it was, it was completely natural to that person. But when I was looking, like, okay.
I do it all the time because when you're on these things, because of the overlays of the technology, if I'm talking and you want to talk, you can't. You interrupt each other. So I find I do things like raise my hand. I'll do this. I'll do any sort of hand gesture so I can give a nonverbal response. So I'm not taking up, so I don't get the little box saying, okay, I've got the floor, I've got the mic. And I think that maybe that's another thing that we can help people with and let them know that it's okay. Salute somebody, wave, thumbs up, any number of things. We're going to become a physical manifestation of the emojis we use when we text.
I think that etiquette, some sort of guideline to etiquette for virtual interviews or onboarding or just meeting the team, I really think it is necessary. And I think companies really should consider starting to come up with that sort of structure, because there are so many people, even if they're comfortable being on a virtual, like a visual virtual call, they might be used to doing it in a social way or with friends or family. And they may not really know what's appropriate, what is that you should sit back a little farther. That it is nice for that employer to see your hand gestures and to see you. And the lighting being bad can be just distracting from the whole conversation. And I think that would be very helpful to this virtual onboarding process. Now, do you find that you see a lot of people, I mean, well, from your personal experience and from your experience, Michael, with the new employees, do you find that you see a lot of people where you're really just seeing their head and they're in a dark room, or, you know, it's very distracting, the other things going on around them, that's hard to really focus on them?
Well, for us, you know, not that it's hard to focus. A lot of us, you know, at our office, most everybody has 3 to 4 monitors. You know, so, you know, going back to the onboarding and getting everybody remote, you know, what we did is, because everybody was purchasing equipment at the same time, we provided a stipend of $1,500 for people to go buy what they needed to do. You know, so now people have monitors. So you catch a lot of people. Like, I have 3 monitors here. I'm looking at my computer, but you know, a lot of the times they're not looking at their camera. They're looking at, you know, the video maybe up on another monitor, and they're looking at you, but the camera's over here. So it's, you know, I find strange things like that is like, even though I'm staring at the camera and staring at you, I'm staring at the side of your face, because even though you're looking at me direct on, you're not looking at the camera. So, you know, it's been interesting. But I think, you know, the interesting whole thing about this in our company is we hire a lot of introverts. You know, people who are just having social, you know, events is not natural for them, even though they enjoy it, and we work around it, and, you know, they've gotten used to it and they're more comfortable with it, but it's the same event all the time that they're used to it. You know, for some reasons, our teams has made them more collaborative. You know, we use teams, you know, they're actually more engaged with their staff. They're actually more engaged with their employees. I hear a lot of people, you know, say every morning they have a quick, you know, 10-minute meeting with their entire staff, and they go about their day. They make sure they check in at least once. I've yet to hear anybody that's like, oh, I haven't talked to my manager in weeks. But when we were in the office, they were like, did you talk to your manager? Like, oh, I haven't seen them in a while. I'm like, you're in the office with them. Like, what do you mean you haven't seen them in a while? But when you talk to them now, it's like, oh yeah, we talk about maybe 2 or 3 times a day. Like, so in all retrospect, even though it's uncomfortable, you know, people are being more engaged, and whether it's because they're lonely at home, or they're, you know, stuck isolated at home, or whether they've had enough of their family, who knows? There's many reasons why, but it's actually worked in a plus. It's actually pretty good.
That might be kind of an interesting scenario, in that we all thought that in the past, people that work virtually were less engaged. But I think because when the field is leveled and everyone's doing it, then you have to find those workarounds. And so it becomes all that more important for the manager to make sure that they're checking in with their team and having you know, more meetings, more, you know, more phone calls. And I've noticed, even in just the 24 hours since I've been working with this company, the amount of check-ins I'm having with the person that I report to, that she's involved in calls. Now I realize it's because she's setting me up for some things, but still I'm looking at some of the schedules that they're putting in, and they do have a fair amount of check-ins that I bet 6 months ago they didn't have. And it was more of that, you know, maybe every other week we'll have an HR meeting together. Now it seems to be more frequent. And I think that may be something that's going to come out of this that I think will be a benefit, because in the past, sorry, something just flipped up on my screen and distracted me. But I think in the past, what was happening is people were not making time. They were not developing their staff. They were just handing them the work and letting them go and really not paying attention to it. And because of the fact that people are feeling a bit more isolated, I think they're making more of an effort. And I think that the first iteration 10, 15 years ago, when IM and things like that were first hitting the office space, they were distractions. I know after a while I got crazy because I had too many things popping up on my screen like it just did. And it would distract me from what I was trying to focus on and the person I was trying to focus on. And I think now, because of the use of Slack or Teams or any number of these collaborative Mondays, whatever you're going to be using, I think it's enabling people to feel more connected than maybe in the past. And so also we've become, as you know, modern citizens, we've become very used to using text. 20 years ago, nobody in the United States was texting. It was very unusual. Europeans, Asians were doing it, but not us. And now we're so used to it, most people prefer to text than talk half the time. And so those text, sorry?
My biggest pet peeve. I definitely prefer phone.
Yeah, but for the right thing, I mean, text is easier. I mean, it has its purposes, but I think that people are much more comfortable with it, and therefore the Slacks and the similar situation softwares, people are becoming more adept at using it and feeling more connected with it. And I think that people are more comfortable with having an electronic connection than they would have been if this had happened 10 years ago.
Right. I agree with that 100%. Have you noticed, one thing I've heard from many HR professionals is, and this might seem a little irrelevant, but when you do that virtual onboarding process, you do the hiring, you do bring someone on board, number one, two things is, let's start with this. Do you need to provide the technology? Because a lot of companies aren't providing that technology, and the expectation is that the employee is going to find a way to work from home, find the computer they need, find the phone they need to do that. They might need to print, they might need to fax. Do you feel like that sort of technology should be provided by all employers for all their employees?
I do. For our, whether we have them purchase it or whether we purchase it for them, like we went through an exercise where we didn't have enough laptops to give to everybody because everybody had, virtual machines within the system, and they obviously couldn't take them home. So we do laptops for them, VPN into the system. Obviously being a brokerage, we obviously, security is the biggest thing, so, even though we've had people reach out, we've given models for them to do it, we're not relying on them using their own laptop. And, the other thing we've just come to the conclusion is, especially people with families, if they have 3 kids and then a wife is working too, are we expecting them to have 5 laptops already? Or are we just going to make the assumption that they're going to bring their own device? And, would prefer it that we purchase the brand new one for them, or they purchase it and they utilize it. We put all our security on it. It just makes it easier, at least the standpoint, if they do leave, we have something back we can utilize for someone else versus, now that God knows what they took off their system, put on their laptop. So I think for us, there is a responsibility, to provide something, whether it's a stipend or whether it is actually a system. They're so cheap. It's not, for companies to say they can't afford it. I'm like, I think that's, unless you're ready to go bankrupt, then don't. But they're so cheap that I think you should do it.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree. I think any company that isn't willing to put up the equipment for their person to be able to work from home, run from that company, because there's going to be other problems working for that company.
I totally agree.
And then it's a question of reimbursing them. For example, do you reimburse for the internet? Most people that we're going to be hiring do have a high-speed internet connection, but it's costing them anywhere from $50 to $100 a month. Should the company get a free ride on that?
You're right. And some people have had to upgrade their internet because they're working from home. They have children homeschooling. They have a spouse that's working from home. And that's coming out of their pocket. That's the extra money they're having to spend that they never would have planned on spending and wasn't part of their budget. I think the same thing for cellular devices, for phones. I think a lot of people right now who are having issues with their internet speed are using hotspots or paying to have a hotspot added to their lines, which also is extra money on top of a higher speed internet. So yeah, I don't know if that's being taken into account by enough employers right now, but it really should be. It seems small, but it's really a big problem for the employee. And go ahead.
No, I was saying it adds up. I mean, just even yesterday, they asked me if I wanted to use my own phone, and I was like, oh, hell no. I mean, even though I just switched to an unlimited data plan.
Right.
If I max out at a certain amount, T-Mobile throttles you. Most companies will. So yeah, give me another phone, because at some point I'm gonna hand the phone back, and I don't want everyone calling me at 3 a.m. on my personal line. But I think that within reason, companies should be taking care of these things, and forward-thinking companies are thinking about what does our employee need to be successful, because employees are in such a stressful situation. You know,
Right.
even me. I mean, I've got, you know, it's not difficult for me to work from home. I've done it before. I did it for years. But I used to have a second room with a desk and a proper office, and I could separate off. Now my desk, I've got a little writer's desk, and it's next to my bed. And fortunately, it's got 2 tiers, so I'm going to have one laptop and a second monitor, and then my laptop on top of that with 2 sets of trackballs. So all of a sudden, I'm juggling all that, and I'm literally right next to my bed. So the stress that employers are going through and trying to even carve out a space to work in their home,
Yes.
especially, you know, if you live in a New York apartment, and if there's kids or there's a second person in the apartment that's doing it. I mean, even right now, we're doing this. I had to send because I'm in his room, I had to send my father out of his room, told him to turn off the TV and go read for an hour because you know, the sound of, you know, the television was coming through the walls. So there's a lot of stuff that you have to think about. And it's more than just, you know, I know we're trying to focus on onboarding, but I think this is part of it.
I
And
agree.
understanding maybe there needs to be a piece in the onboarding process that says to the candidate, there's a checklist. Tell us what your situation at home is. What do you need? Do you need a desk? You know, for $100, you can order somebody a desk. They may need a desk. They may need a comfortable chair. You know, the reality is most people are not going to be going back to work probably for another 6 months.
Right.
So what is the work, you know, when we work in HR, what are the workers' comp implications of forcing somebody to sit in a kitchen table, you know, with their head down at the computer because it's not at the right height and they don't have the right ergonomics and all of that. So are we creating a generation of people that are going to have health problems because they don't have appropriate workstations at home?
I think we're all waiting on that workers' comp thing because I don't think we've actually addressed it yet for remote working. So, but you know, I do agree with you. You know, going back to the onboarding piece, you know, I don't think it would ask the questions beforehand. What do you need? Because you know, I wouldn't want. Obviously, you could fall into like a discriminatory if they don't have the right equipment. That, you know, maybe you're assuming that they're, you know, a certain, you know, whatever, just stereotype that they don't have it. So, you know, but I do agree there be some checklists. Okay, you know, what would you need to perform to be 100% in working remote? What do you need to perform? And then we just literally go out and get it from it gets shipped to them or whatever. But no, I agree with that.
I wasn't suggesting that we do it at the interview stage. This would be part of the onboarding once they've been hired and all of that.
Right.
When you have to have that conversation saying, okay, you're going to be working from home. Tell us, you know, these are the items we think you might be needing. Is there anything that's not on here that you need? And please don't.
No, I agree. Provide them with the basic, provide them with the basics and then the checklist. Here are the options that you could add after. And, you know, we'll get you that within a week. No, I agree. You know, I think we've kind of laid back a little bit on, you know, we're hoping, you know, within, you know, that this is going to go away. You know, I don't believe we'll go back. Well, I can tell you, I know for a fact, I don't think we'll be remaining 100% remote working once this is all over. I think we'll go back. But I think we've gone from no one ever working remote to 100% remote. But I think we'll find something in between that, you know, once we figure that piece out, then kind of decide what do we need to do to get people up and running, and, you know, whether they will be, you know, are we going to continue to grow, you know, brick and mortar? Are we just going to say this is where we are and, you know, everybody else that's hired after this is remote, and maybe we pull them in and maybe we switch to hotel seating, and, you know, so there's a lot of options we do, and there's so much unknown, we just don't have the answers for it. Now, the onboarding piece is, you know, the only thing I can say and advise, in my opinion, is that the more people that you have connecting to the people coming in, the better off we'll be.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the HR roles that we've learned, at least in my perspective, I've become more of a therapist in the last 6 months than I've ever felt. And, you know, I'm not a very emotional person, but I've heard more stories and more, you know, having to talk to people that have found this very difficult. And I think that this is, you know, my advice for managers and for HR staff as this continues to go, is that the amount of empathy and confidence and, you know, persuasion that you have, the better you off the people are going to be listening to you. Because if you don't have that, you know, and you act as if you're the HR staff from 30 years ago, where you're an admin and all you're doing is administrative duties, you're going to fail. you know,
Right.
because this is a world, and I don't think it's ever going to go back to a normal work environment ever again.
I think you bring up an interesting point in that, and going back to that, not only does, what does the person need in terms of the physical setup of their office, understand we're having to have conversations with employees about things like what's going on at home. Can you find a spot in your house where you can be quiet? Do you get downtime? What's it like to try and do project work? Those are things that people are struggling with, especially people that have school-aged kids. I don't know how the hell they're getting through this. I can't even begin to imagine what it's like. I think that's probably the toughest thing of anyone going through it. And most of our employees are going to be of an age where they've got young children, so they're going to be dealing with that. So I think we also have to understand that it's not you flip a switch and everyone works from home and everything's perfectly normal and they just work from home and it's just like it always was. We have to understand that timetables may shift, deadlines may be missed, things are going to happen, people are going to be a little bit more sensitive, they're going to be more tired. There's trade-offs there, and so nobody's going to be operating under optimal circumstances. And so I think having opportunities for people to share that information, even if it's just publicizing EAP or creating, maybe it's a question of companies having a psychologist that's on call that people can talk to when there's, when they are feeling stressed out, because I think a lot of employees are experiencing that. And especially imagine going into a new company, and at least at the old company, they were with you through maternity leave. You've got kids, they've been through it all. Now you're in a new company and nobody knows your story. And how do you talk to them and say, look, I'm literally having to work on my lap in my bed because my kids are at the desk and my husband's doing this, and here's what my situation is. So I think just being open and creating channels where people can unburden themselves in those situations so that we can make them productive, or as productive as possible and assimilated as easily as possible, because this is not a turnkey where just send them a laptop and they're good to go.
I want to just switch not switch the topic, but turn the table just a little bit. So we've talked about the onboarding, we've talked about pros and cons of everything as far as virtual onboarding, but the step that comes before the virtual onboarding is obviously figuring out, especially if you have different teams and different managers of each team, how do you teach, as HR, how do you teach your managers what are the proper things, realistic qualities to look for to begin that onboarding and hiring process? And then once they're onboarded, what are some things that managers should be taught to do to make that person feel like they're part of the team, to really bring them in? But I think the most important is how do we teach them about realistic qualities and things to look for right now during this pandemic?
Well, I think it's an interesting one. For managers now, like I wouldn't say we're unique, but we do a lot of these kind of cultural tests and cognitive tests before they come in. So a lot of the sense we don't know anything about the person, but we know that the person, based on these predictive indexes, they have a lot of drive, or they're not very collaborative, but they're very precise. So we have that little bit of, understanding about the individual beforehand. So I think it kind of helps them a little bit when they're asking them questions. The one thing that, I know people do is, and what we've tried to educate people to, and this is definitely what HR, should be leading the charge, is by practice, by example, is, coming up with these open-ended questions that keep people talking, keep people, don't fire 7 questions at them and, expect them to answer. And they're all basically just, SHRM questions.
Yeah.
But they just posted that these are the best five interview questions you can ask. I'm like, you're not going to get anything out of these people that when you speak to them. You need to be a little more unique.
Right.
I remember interviewing for Amazon years ago, and the questions they ask, as off the wall as were unique, and I think they're probably appropriate now to do it over the phone or doing Zoom calls. We actually do encourage people to do interviewing, either everybody get a phone screen, but now it's always a Zoom screen. or a Teams or something that, that where they can do a video call, and it's always recorded so they can go back and look at it again so they can re-look at the answers. I think managers should look for something, how strong do they look in the sense that they're very confident about their answers. It's, if you can get out of them is, how do they feel about working remote and being a little bit isolated? That's kind of good. You're seeing, okay, well, this person's done it before. They have the capacity to kind of take it on. And, I think managers should be more upfront when they do hire people that we don't expect you to be always on. I think the biggest error that we have right now is that because we work remote, people by human nature are on 24/7.
Right.
And if I get an email by my manager at 10 o'clock, I'm responding at 10:01. I'm like, well, you shouldn't be doing that, and I don't expect other people to do that. But what they're missing is that, well, then you don't send them the email. Sit on it, write it. Outlook has where you can delay their sending till 7 o'clock in the morning. Just do that. Like, why do you have to send it now?
Right.
Because they're going to respond, especially new hires. They're going to want to come on board and impress you, do everything they can, and then they get burned out because they've literally done everything they possibly could. And
Exactly.
you should be very upfront about before you come in. Our culture is that we are very demanding. However, and we do, some people do this, even when we were all in the offices, we when we weren't remote, we ordered lunch for everybody, everybody get free lunch. We expect people to, to sit at their desk, eat their lunch, do whatever. But the idea is it's not because we want to work you to death. Is we want you to come in at 9 and leave at 5 and never think about us again. Get your stuff done and go away at 5 and be done with it. We don't, if we get all that done and within the hours of that period of time, you're never going to get a call on the weekend. You're never going to get a call at 6 o'clock at night or not. Now it's a little bit different. Now it's because they have access to them all the time. Now it's like, you need to turn off. And the only way to do that is get the managers to lead by example. So I know that was off topic, but so.
I think still remain. I think it actually is, because I think what I was thinking in response to your question was really looking at telling the managers to really assess what their culture is and what their expectations are. I think, again, everyone's talking about culture and what's the culture of your company, and most companies haven't done the work to actually figure that out. Very few really have, and in all honesty, very few companies have a distinct culture. But I think that managers have to figure out what's the dynamic on your team. Whenever I'm doing an intake with a manager, I always ask, what's the team like? Who are the players in your direct reports? What do they like? How do they interact? What are your expectations of them? Why would somebody want to work for you? What are the skill sets that they're going to need when they hit the ground? And what are the skill sets you expect them to develop? And also, what are the business problems? Don't tell me about the laundry list of the qualifications they need to have. You need to start with what is the business problem they're looking for this person to solve. And then when they interview that person, they need to keep that in mind. So they're asking questions to ascertain whether or not that person's had experience solving that kind of business problem. Because all too often managers get caught up on whether they've had this kind of software versus that kind of software, or they've worked in this industry versus that industry. And the reality is we're looking for people that can think. And unless it is something so industry specific, like if you're in pharma, you're hiring somebody with pharmacology experience, okay, you've got to, they've got to have that. But it's still, what is the problem? What are the challenges that they're going to be confronted with when they get here? What are the top 3 things that you expect this person to be able to resolve for you? And interview to that point. Don't get caught up in whether they've got 3 years or 5 years, or whether they've worked with SAS, SAP, Oracle, or Workday. Doesn't matter. If they work with one, they'll figure it out. The question is, can they navigate through a system? Do they understand how a system works? Have they managed a project? Can they lay it out? What's their thought process? So I think a lot of companies have done case studies. The problem with that is you've got to have somebody that knows what they're doing and building those case studies to ask the people to do it. And then you've got to have people that are really good at assessing what the answers are to those kind of case studies. Otherwise, you're just playing amateur psychologist and torturing the candidate. But I think if I had the number one thing that I could shift, from an interview process, is talk to the people, engage with them, get them into a conversation and understand their thinking about how they do things, as opposed to a litany of, tell me about a time when you missed a deadline. That tells you nothing. I mean, at the end of the day, it really tells you nothing about that person, because I'm going to be honest with you, if somebody's smart, they're going to invent an answer if they can't come up with one. I know I personally, full disclosure, I've sat interviews, and when I've gotten those 10 dumb SHRM behavioral interviewing questions, I've invented the answer just to see if the person figured out that I was completely inventing it, and they don't. I mean, I've had them sitting there saying, wow, these are great answers. That's a great example. I'm like, what do I do for a living? I'm a recruiter. If I can't ace this one. So I think people need to stop relying on the perfect interview question. I've been most successful when I've just kind of disarmed the person by talking to them, and then they get comfortable and they start telling me things that they probably wouldn't have told me if it was a very formal interview.
Right.
And you've got to be careful, because you don't want to get into areas of illegality. But I think in treating an interview as a conversation as opposed to an interrogation, it makes a big difference. I try and tell people what the reality is of the organization they're going to be joining, warts and all. My feeling is, and I tell them, you've lived with yourself for 30 odd years. I'm going to talk to you for 15 minutes. I cannot possibly figure out if you're the right person or if this is the right situation. So I'm going to lay out the situation, tell you about what it's like to work here. You tell me if this is an opportunity that makes sense for you. And all of a sudden, it turns the dynamic of the conversation. So now they're assessing whether it's the right fit for them, as opposed to you being the only one that's engaged. It's now a two-way thing as opposed to a one-way. And I find that really effective. And I think if managers focus on that, then they're going to be more successful in hiring people that stick.
I agree. And finding that uniqueness, it's interesting you say that. Like I've hired many people, and a lot of the people I do, I do the same thing. I come up with questions that basically are a little bit off the wall. They, respond in something that they say calls me interested. I remember, many years ago when I, a person who worked for me brought a person's resume to me, and she came in to get a job, and I read the resume, and it literally was someone straight out of college, and the resume had maybe 5 lines on it, and it was full of spelling mistakes. I'm like, listen to me. I'm like, I can't hire you like this. I'm like, I want you to go home this weekend, come back, and write something for me that tells me why I should hire you. And she came back. She wrote a nice little essay. She updated her resume, fixed it, and gave it to me. And I did hire her, took a chance on her. She had no experience. Now she's a director of payroll for a big company. Now she had the skill set. It was something unique. And she was there. I worked at an airline, and she had a lot of experience, but she had a lot of drive. If it wasn't for something unique that she identified, she probably wouldn't have got the opportunity. I'm sure how many people probably slammed the door on her just because they looked at her resume. Mm-hmm. There's other stories too that I've seen. The interesting, if you do get them to open up, I do think that you would have a more diverse workforce, because it's interesting with everybody. Something we do, and it's not something, I don't think it works for everybody. All the testing, we know whether they can do what they do before they get there, because, before they even have the phone screen, we're sending the predictive index, so we know the kind of drive they have. We send them online tests, so we know whether they can pass it or not. If they don't pass, obviously they're not going to get to the next level. So before they even, walk in the door, what I don't like is we do have programmers asking them, again, more programming questions. I'm like, they just passed the test. They just did everything possible. Why are you wasting their questions on programming? Now you want to get to know him. Now you want to know whether you're going to like the guy or whether he's going to like you.
Yeah.
I think that's what we try to educate them on. But, again, a lot of the people we put in management positions aren't experienced in it. So they learned from above, or they read a book, or, again, they looked up SHRM and those behavioral questions, and that's what they use. Well, if it's on here, we have to use it. But it's, you're going to get what you get. And they're not going to stay unless you ask them those unique questions, and that stands out. They're like, you know what? I like this company. Because I've turned down jobs just because of how the interview went, not because it wasn't a great job.
Right.
Why are you asking me this? I'm like, I don't get it. So,
I think the biggest takeaway from this conversation with the two of you is that this onboarding process, I know that onboarding prior to pandemic was probably a little bit more systematic, just structured process. But I think that it's very imperative that employers and HR really start to see now that onboarding is not just onboarding someone. It's really learning about their lives. And this whole virtual experience, people being at home, is a great opportunity to see what someone's life is like outside of work. And that should be a part of getting to know someone. So I really do think that I hope this opens up eyes to people, as it's imperative to get to know the person, get to know what their work ethic is like, and not just stick to lines on a resume or a checklist that you have or structured questions. I think you hit the nail on the head.